Hey folks, Loman02. I'm going to actually be doing a much shorter deck tech, but covering some gameplay with this Canadian Highlander deck that you have in front of you, which is Izzet Tempo. So Canadian Highlander is a 100 card singleton format that is played with the vintage ban list. It has a pointing system such that the most powerful cards over the course of Magic's history have points. Each deck is allowed up to 10 points. The cards are evaluated. Those cards that are deemed to need to be pointed are evaluated on a scale of, 1 to, I suppose, up to a maximum of 10. But the highest pointed card is 7. It's Black Lotus and Ancestral Recall, and possibly soon Time Walk, but currently that's a 6-pointer. Time Vault, too. I think it's a 6-pointer. What is the appeal of the format? Well, the format is exceedingly wide open. You can play pretty much whatever you want. Once you get to the top, like most competitive levels, there's definitely certain decks I think you need to be concerned about, or just you need to be prepared for, because they're very powerful. And that kind of ties into what the deck I have here is, which is Izzet Tempo. So the idea behind Izzet Tempo and like blue-red in general is really variable, and it can go down to as low as like an Izzet Blitz deck, which would have like Goblin Guides and those sort of threats, Zergos, but a lot of like 1-mana red threats, maybe more shocks, still a lot of spells, matter cards, but basically kind of like a mix of red deck wins with like the best blue card selection that kind of fuel those threats. And then you have Blue-Red Moon, which is like a big blue control deck that splashes red for Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon to have mana denial, and then it has a lot of draw go-y kind of 1-for-1 counters. Tends to be a recall deck, but it doesn't have to be. And it kind of works that way. It's a much longer game deck that can win with one big finisher, or can have multiple different ways of winning. Sometimes you see decks like that run like Platinum Imperium Madcap Experiment. It's getting a little dated, but I mean it is a thing that you can do in that deck. And then you kind of have the decks in between, which is what this deck is. It's an Izzet Tempo deck. I have done a deck tech on this deck before. I'm going to cover the changes in it. But if this is the first time you're kind of seeing this deck or viewing my content, check back through the catalogs that I've got. I think probably half a year back or so. I did a deck tech that was fairly exhaustive on Izzet Tempo itself. What really is Tempo? Well, Tempo is kind of in that middle ground between aggressive and mid-range. It tends to have more insular cards. And the way you're kind of able to get away or around having more insular cards is by having a large volume of selection, card selection. This deck doesn't really pull any punches on it. It runs a vast amount of card selection. Let me pull up. Ooh, that's big, Moto. Thanks for the very large viewing window. It runs a very vast selection engine. When I say selection, I mean card drawing, filtration, and even sometimes just, at card disadvantage too. Because you could be in certain matchups, like against like red deck wins or mono black aggro or white weenie, where like Price of Progress is just utterly bad. It's just not good. Is the card worth cutting? Absolutely not, because it's probably one of the cards that I win with most often in this deck, against a wide array of the field, because obviously dual lands are pretty popular. Playing, 3 and up colors is pretty popular, and this card can end games really fast, but in certain matchups is really bad. So a lot of the cards kind of tend to share two qualities. One, they're very good at the job they're intended to do for a very low rate. So they're very cheap, and they're very good. And that's kind of what, I think historically over Magic's history, it'd be called Xerox. It's a Xerox-style deck. And the way that you're able to kind of get after those powerful effects that are fairly singular or just kind of pointed and not that flexible is you have a lot of card draw. So, you have a lot more command over what it is you are putting into your hand, so that you can play the game the way you deem is necessary in the matchup that you're in. That's kind of the whole philosophy behind the deck. And then it just has a lot of cool threats that kind of matter with, these cards that are drawing cards and putting more cards in your hand. And basically, cards making cards tend to be really good with, effects like Dreadhorde Arcanist, Thing in the Ice, Snapcaster Mage, Faerie Vandal. If you're seeing a lot of cards, this card's quite strong. Brynhorn Cutthroat, if you're countering a lot of spells, playing a lot of instant speed draw or burn, this card's also quite good. It kind of sets a theme as you go through the deck. And if you want to check the deck tech out from before, 90% plus of these cards are covered there. However, there have been actually significant changes because 2019 has been kind of a tumultuous year. In some folks' opinions, maybe not a great year for Magic. But there's been a lot of very powerful cards printed. And this deck's actually received some updates. I was actually talking to a few folks about this deck, and I noticed when I linked the deck that there were significant amounts of cards. There's actually still one that I probably should consider adding into this list. That's Mystic Sanctuary. I have not yet. It's a 30 land deck, and oftentimes you're getting to 4 lands and stopping with this deck. 'Cause it is an aggro control deck or tempo deck at its heart. But yeah, I want to cover that. So that's kind of what the deck's about. It goes in with a very flexible role in a variety of different matchups. It's going to tend to benefit a higher volume of pilot experience in the format. That said, I wouldn't eschew a deck like this if you were a newer pilot, but I do think initially you're going to take more game losses with it because it requires a decent bit of knowledge to pilot well in the variety and the width of the metagame. So if you haven't played a lot of games Canadian Highlander and you haven't exhaustively researched it, how you play against like a storm deck or a control deck or an aggressive deck or a lands, combo mid-range deck, or any plethora academy decks, a plethora of different decks in the format. It's going to be a lot different. Like in some of them, you're going to have to assume the control role early, like against aggro. And then in some, you're going to want to just be very aggressive right out the gates, like get your threat down and then just, protect the queen style play, where you just kind of keep it in play and stop, them from getting rid of it or doing something that will proactively end the game proactively end the game in their favor. So kind of a protect the queen strategy when you're looking at tempo, and you don't want the game to drag on forever. Well, you do have a very large suite of counter magic next to the cantrips right here and the cards, the draw cards. The deck's not intended or designed to just sit there and counter spells all day long, and eventually win with some massive win con like Inferno Titan or whatever, and treat the Angels. It's not Blue-White Miracles, and it's not Blue-Red Moon, where it just wins with one big thing. It wins with a lot of chippy incremental things, and that's just what it does. It just wins with a lot of chippy incremental threats that by design tend to have flash or be very cheap, or have secondary effects that kind of complement the card drawing engines or the damage pushing engines that are in the deck. That said, it does have a couple haymakers. One of the big pulls to this deck is that you get to play Price of Progress. We are playing a few non-basic lands, but Price of Progress tends to be a power finisher. Depending on the matchup. I mean, it can be utterly horrible, or it can do upwards of 12, 14 damage and just kill someone on the spot, which is kind of one of the it's kind of one of the haymakers the deck does pack, and it's kind of, I think, one of the reasons to be in blue-red tempo. Coupled with the fact that your removal suite is also clock. So one of the big things in this format, like you'll see, is that red removal is really big, and a big reason why is because even though these are 100-card decks and you're only playing singleton copies, the more and more, I think, competitively you play it, or the more you want to design your decks to win, and not everyone does. Some folks are just in it for fun, but if you want to design the deck to the limit of its power, one of the big benefits to having like red base removal is that it kind of fulfills two roles, which frees up slots in your deck. There's not really, realistically, like if you're building for competitive play in the format, which, I mean, I'm saying competitive play, but it's competitive casual. There's nothing on the line. It's for fun. But if you're building to win consistently, I guess I should say, because when I say competitive, that could mean Pro Tour top 8 or something for someone, but it's not that. But when you're building these things, and if you're building that way, oftentimes what you'll find over time is that the slots in your deck become very very strict. You have very little wiggle room in what you do with your slots, especially if the deck is meta'd pretty well for what you expect, or it's kind of designed for what the field's going to look like. So having the ability to have burn, why red removal is obviously so popular, why it is so popular, is because it has two effects, right? Like, you can pare down your threat density, which this deck has certainly not done. It's very high in threats. But when it's not relevant, like against, like, for instance, a storm deck or a control deck where they don't play a ton of creatures and this removal is not very good against their creatures, you can just point it right at their face, or it can hit planeswalkers. So it's just very flexible, as opposed to like looking at cards like Go for the Throat, which is a great card, and it's very solid in a lot of matchups, but it doesn't have the maximum flexibility that Burn has. That's why I tend to see it's very popular in the format, and it's one of the big pulls to playing, I think, a blue-red based tempo deck. Blue-green's pretty historically popular in the format as well, because you get better, bigger threats that are just about as efficient, or actually just as efficient as the threats that are in this deck. But you tend to lack a wide variety of board-impacting cards, such that if enough is resolved, like, you're often kind of left at the mercy of the board. And you also don't have Price of Progress. You have Berserk, which Berserk and Price of Progress kind of fulfill the same role in both decks. So, yeah, tempo. this is it. This is what it does. As far as my points go in this deck, because I did kind of talk points initially and didn't jump into them, I'm playing Ancestral Recall in this build. I wouldn't fault anyone for playing Time Walk in it. I just tend to find that this build is pretty specifically card hungry. So I tend to like Recall a little bit better. It's a little cheaper than Time Walk is. Right now I don't have a ton of ways of recursing Ancestral in the deck, or like a Time Walk. I don't have like any loops with it. So I tend to find this card's a little better in the build. Dig Through Time, this is kind of the flex point that's in the deck. I tend to find that Dig Through Time is pretty good because, like I was saying, you have a lot of cards that have kind of variable value depending on where you're at in the game or what matchup you're in. This really lets you get that selection. You could also run Treasure Cruise, and it wouldn't be bad. Obviously, it's more cards for just one card. But oftentimes I tend to find that having the right 2 cards is a lot better than just having 3 more cards. And then Mystical Tutor. I think Mystical Tutor is also pretty much canon. I think Dig Through Time you could play with, and Ancestral you could play with, and be Time Walker Ancestral. Mystical, I honestly think is probably the most important set of points in the deck, or the most operative. And the reason being really is because I'm running Ancestral, and then my biggest win con, Price of Progress, is tutorable off of it. So I'm very happy with Mystical Tutor. This last point, though, you could play with, and you could even put True Name Nemesis in it if you wanted to, or True Name Nemesis in if you wanted to. I don't think you need to, though. I think True Name Nemesis is a good card, but it's kind of one of those cards that like is fine, but it's not really that much faster than what else you've got in here. It's a little bit easier to protect, but again, like, we are playing a Protect the Queen strategy, so our deck's kind of designed to already do that. So like having True Name is kind of nice because then you don't have to protect it, but then what are you doing with your cards at that point? Because your cards are kind of designed in a way to do that. And I think in general, like, it's a lot of mana for a 3-power attacker. Is it very resilient, very tough to get through? Yeah. And if I was in a more aggressive metagame, or if I was playing against a ton of aggressive decks on a regular basis, I would definitely consider putting it in because it's very good at blocking those out. But again, if I was in a very aggressive metagame, which historically Tempo is not great at beating, I just wouldn't run Tempo because it's not great for it. Like, Red Deck wins, kind of eats this deck's lunch money, or kind of takes this deck's lunch money, beats you up and takes it. But against most other things, it's actually quite strong. Against mid-range, it's about a 50% matchup. Against combo and control, this deck tends to be great. That's what it's really designed to do, is beat up on the decks that are trying to put a lot of cards together to have very powerful effects, and or are just slow. So land a threat, protect it, counter their relevant stuff, kill them. Anyways, let's go over the changes in the deck real fast. Then I'm going to jump into a bunch of gameplay with this deck. So, changes in recent history. There have been a lot of very powerful cards printed in recent history, and I want to kind of cover a couple of them here. Last time, I don't believe Dreadhorde Arcanist was in this deck. This card is not that, it's kind of getting older now, but this card is very powerful. We have a ton of 1-mana spells in the deck, whether it's Burn, whether it's Card Draw, even Bounce, with Vapor Snag in the deck. Card is just kind of a house. So this card just kind of does it. That does it all. It's also a 1/3, which is actually a relevant size for 2 mana. Thing in the Ice, getting closer and closer to the chopping board, but because this is a kind of a tempo deck, not really like a true blitz deck, I'm still kind of high on Thing in the Ice. Now, we are playing a significant number of creatures, 23. I would really call it 22, because Jace Prodigy is kind of just, honestly just a value engine in the deck. But Thing in the Ice still, I feel like having access to this card wins you a lot of games that are unwinnable. So against the aggressive decks, this is kind of like, a Spellskite / Wall of Omens that, at some point is, after you've developed your mana base, is going to allow you to turn their board upside down and then use all the counter magic that's trapped in your hand to counter that stuff on the backswing while you're hitting them for 7 a turn, which is a significant bit of damage. Going down, I started jumping into talking through some cards. I was just talking Thing because I think a lot of folks have started cutting Thing, but I think this deck is, still at a point where it's not blitzy enough that you still kind of want that effect to kind of complement the aggro control game plan. Faerie Vandal. This is a new print too. This card, is kind of unassuming, and I was honestly on the fence about it until I was playing it recently, and I was like, wow, this card is just actually really good. A 1/2 for 2, not impressive. Flash, flying, not that impressive. But in a deck that, very often is seeing multiple cards a turn with all of these cantrips and draw cards over here, it's just very, very powerful. This card is just, it turns into a 4 or 5 relatively quickly. Brynhorn Cutthroat. This card also is relatively new, but I don't believe I covered it. Playing it in this deck before. This deck tends to play a lot of spells on the opposing turn. This counts any spell, so I mean even your flash creatures are going to count towards buffing this thing up, which can tend to surprise folks. And it's a good card to actually play the Protect the Queen strategy because they're trying to deal with it, and you're countering stuff and just making it bigger and bigger each time. So you don't really have to apply more pressure if you get this down and you're able to protect it multiple times. It's just eventually going to kill them and just kind of chip in for 3, 4, 5, and then they're dead the next turn. All right, what else do we have? Brazen Borrower, new ad as well. This card's great. The fact that it can't block really isn't that big of a deal because, as I said, this is kind of an offensive deck. It's it does sometimes want to block, comes up, but also the ability to kind of have a free bounce spell. Like running cards like Into the Royal and like Blink of an Eye. They're kind of sometimes things you like have to do, but you don't want to do because they're a lot of mana. They're kind of clunky. And this card kind of gets around like having to run those sort of cards because it just gives you that ability against the most aggressive decks or against like the really fast ramp decks like the Academy decks to get rid of problematic permanents that you couldn't deal with early and then deal with them on the backswing on their next turn. And it's a 3-1 to boot at a very good rate. All right, Bonecrusher Giant. This one actually replaced Rabblemaster number 2. I believe it is the Mentor card. I can never remember if it. Not Harsh Mentor. The Mentor Goblin that makes Gobos. But this card replaced it. And really just because of the card's flexibility. This card is a good threat to end games with. It's good at stopping life. It's good at stopping prevention clauses. So, like, if someone does get down like a True Name Nemesis, which habitually has kind of been a problematic card for Blue-Red because, outside of like tapping it with Cryptic Command, or if you're going to run like cards that typically aren't that great, like what is it? Not Into the Royal. The 2-mana bounce spell that has Overload. There's cards that can deal with it in blue and red, but they're oftentimes pretty rare. I mean, you don't want to run Flaring Pain in your deck either to stop the damage prevention clause from the protection that it has against a player. But Bonecrusher allows you to do that. So like if they if you attack into them and like they block, like they have to be concerned that if they block, you're like your Direfleet Daredevil that like you could just cast Stomp, the Stomp half of this, do 2 damage to their face or to one of their other creatures, then like their True Name just dies to first strike damage. So this card's pretty cool that way. It's also just a random burn spell. It's a little over costed for the burn spell, but the fact that it's attached to a 4/3 body that basically says, hey, if you deal with this, you're taking damage, is just really good. All right, what else we have? I don't know if I was running Art like Phoenix in the last iteration of this, but this card's also good. When you have cards like Faithless Looting and Careful Study, it's pretty easy to get rid of if you don't want it. And honestly, if you draw it late, like paying for an evasive, hasty, 3 damage burn spell isn't bad. I mean, if you're casting at the turn, you're winning the game. It's all right. And getting it back is not hard in the deck either. All right, going into the counter magic. I don't believe there's any new counter magic, but let's go through. Actually, I'm going to talk this card. Force of Negation was already in there, but Ark Mages Charm. A lot of folks I think are like on the fence about this card. I was too because like 3 blue's a lot. This is a preponderance of this deck is blue, so it's not really an issue to cast it. I think if it were like a more 50-50 split mana base, I would be more timorous to play it. But if you're on more of a blue-based tempo deck, as opposed to like a 50-50 split deck, like a Izzet Blitz or Blue-Red Moon, even Blue-Red Moon, I kind of tend to like this card. But in this style build, I really like it. It's a little bit overcosted for all of the effects it has. So the effects, counter target spell, draw 2 cards, so it's instant speed, divination, and gain control of target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. This is the big one. So Ark Mages Charm is interesting from the standpoint that it deals with a lot of like problematic permanents in the format. So Soul Rings, Mana Crypts. Given by the time you're getting to 3 mana, like they probably already kind of run amok a little bit with the game. Merit Lage, although the deck does have other ways to deal with Merit Lage. You can do Expedition Map. There's a lot of 1-mana creatures that are problematic, like Deathrite Shaman. There's some significantly sized threats that are 1 mana as well, or just very cheap, like Terramander, Delver. You see quite a few. Mother of Runes, if they tap it, you can steal it, in response to, trying to burn it out or something. with a shock. But the card just does a significant bit. That gain control, like that is a very powerful effect. It's generally speaking going to end up being an automatic 2-for-1 because you've probably seen if you're a longtime player, like control magic effects tend to almost always equate to 2-for-1s, and they also tie up a ton of mana over the course of 2 turn cycles. So it tend to be very good. And just having the flexibility to counter any spell, having another counter in the deck, and force someone to draw. I'm sorry, it's target players. It's a force draw. Is very strong. Alrighty, Misdirection. Don't need to talk this card. No, this is in here last time. I don't need to talk this, but I like this card and this style of deck pretty specifically. It's good for protecting threats from removal. Alright, card draw. Let's see if there's anything new in here. I don't believe there is. One card we could talk in card draw though is the Royal Scions. That's a card that I could see doing or playing in this deck to kind of complement some of the spells matter cards, because some of them are spells matters in your graveyard style cards. I am running Dak Faden right now. I tend to find that being able to steal artifacts is really relevant. That said, I don't think it's incorrect to run the Royal Scions in this, and it actually could be more correct. I'd probably have to look at more cuts, but I do think, in future iterations, I'll probably attempt to run that card over some other card that I currently have in here. Then the last card to really talk is Mystic Sanctuary. So Mystic Sanctuary island, so of note, non-basic, but it is an island. If you have 3 or more islands in play, when it enters untapped, and it allows you to put an instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your deck. That's probably a card I probably should look to play in here. One of the issues I have with it is I'm a Price of Progress deck. And secondly, the deck really needs its mana on time. So if you draw it like turn 2 and you're drawing to land, it's really bad. You can lead on it, and it's fine if you lead on it. And obviously it's very nice to fetch like on turn 4 and like put something on top when you have 3 other islands in play. But I don't know. I really am dependent on the mana in this deck. It's a very mana lean deck, as you can see. It's 30 lands, which is very lean. It's relying on its cantrips to kind of fix that and get through lands, and then just consistently have gas because it's using its cantrips to find lands, or if you have lands, you're using it to find other stuff. But having tapped lands tends to be really brutal, especially in the early turns, because those are the most formative, and like you really need to interact heavily during those turns. So I'm not running that card yet, but I think it's definitely worth testing in this build. I run it in my big blue decks. I run it in some of the combo decks that I've built. I'm just not running it here. Another notable missing card is Wasteland. I'm not running Wasteland in this deck either, which could possibly be a mistake. Because I'm a Price of Progress deck, I kind of have that as a win con, and the other piece is, like, it's a very pip-intensive deck, and having to go down a land drop in this deck tends to be kind of rough. You're not like an aggressive deck where, you can be aggressive, but you're not really like pure aggressive where you have such a high density of threats, that 1 mana that, Wastelanding on turn 2 with, to play a second 1 mana spell, second 1 mana creature is really a high likelihood. It's not a likelihood really at all. I think there's only a couple 1 mana creatures. That could happen. But it's very unlikely that that's a general sequence. Typically speaking, you want to resolve like a turn 1 or turn 2 threat, and then just keep on countering spells until they fall over dead. In Wasteland, I was kind of finding in this build had issues doing that. Now, I play it in a lot of other blue-red strategies like Blue-Red Moon. I think it's fine there because you're playing a much longer game, and you want to have that utility out of it. It's not really used for tempo, but utility in that style of matchup. So some folks may think that's crazy, but I'm not running it because I found oftentimes it just screwed up my mana too much. In regards to tap lands, the only one that I'm playing that's kind of a strict tap land is Wandering Fumarole, just because of the flexibility it represents if the game does go long or gets drawn out against like a traditional matchup. But I wouldn't fault anyone for not running it. It's just mana fixing's tough and in 2-color, and you want to have good mana over the course of a game. And then Spirebluff Canal. But like I said, if you're playing this on turn 4 after you played 3 other lands, sometimes it can be an issue, but by that point you've established your mana base. It's really turns 1 through 3 that really matter for the deck as far as mana goes, and oftentimes you just want your mana to be untapped. Anyways, guys, that is the deck. Some considerations and new considerations that have been put into the build of it. If you kind of want to look through the deck more holistically, jump into my archives. I do have Izzet Tempo up and prior to most of these changes, and let me know what you think. Anyways, quick pause, guys. I'll be back momentarily with a bunch of gameplay with this deck, and hopefully you guys enjoy. All right, guys, we're back, and first game here. So we're playing against Nate here. I had to mull the 5 this one. First couple hands were not that great. This one at least is going to, I hope, find its second land. It's got Force of Will. It's got Impulse. So it's got a bit of game, but I'm not too optimistic because I don't have pressure, which is really an essential component. But once you're at 5 cards, like your resources are significantly low, and this card, or this hand at least has Impulse to try to find a threat. One of the liabilities it has, though, is it doesn't have access to red mana right now, which can be problematic. So I take a look. I end up picking up the Snapcaster because it gives me a secondary sleight of hand. Find my red mana, which is good. It's a good start. The only problem with Snapcaster here, and I'm not going to cast Snapcaster for sleight of hand. I'm going to actually wait and see if I can Impulse with it. The one downside of Snapcaster is, though, that digging through time is going to be a little tougher because I'm going to possibly be using it. So when they play land tax here, I do opt to go for the sleight of hand. I'm like, hey, I have pressure now. Like, I don't really want to play into land tax. I don't really need to, is the thing. I don't have much else going on. They blow my Snapcaster, which is fine. It's punishing fire. It's fine with me. The one downside to this is that I do not have red mana in place. I can't play this DAC and try to punish them for not playing lands as well. But honestly, my hand's not that great, so like I don't need to make the first move here. Now, one of the things I could do, they cast Quiet Speculation, which is going to get them 3 flashback cards. Not one you often see, but Savine's Wreck, very powerful. Forbidden Alchemy, pretty powerful. Ray of Revelation, So if you're not familiar with these cards, Ray of Revelation flashes back for green, I believe, and blows up Enchantment. I don't have any of those in the deck. I get mana drained here. That's fine. I go ahead and Force of Will it. Forbidden Alchemy costs a bunch to flash back at 7 mana, but it looks at your top 4, puts the rest in the graveyard. Okay, so a Red and 6 gets played here. They get the Strip Mine back. This is very bad for me. I actually miscount here, and I believe make a misplay. I believe I play the Terramander out accidentally. It does keep them from getting back the Ren and 6, or the Strip Mine for a turn, or force them to do it a turn later. I think I probably should have just dug through time and then left up Negate, but, such is life. Players make errors sometimes. I also, if I'm going to dig here, is the replay going to work? I hope it works. If I dug with this mana, I probably should have not used. I probably should have used. Oh, I did use the mana there. So I get Price of Progress. I get Goblin Rider Buster. So at this point, I kind of have an out to their lock. I have Price of Progress, which is one of the big win cons in the deck. The Terramander play was a little dicey, though. I think I should have just left up Negate. They have a Jace out now, which is problematic, but I'm able to resolve this Rabblemaster on a tap-out turn with them on 3 cards. It's also going to be a bit tougher for them to get tax down. But now they have Zuran Orb, so if they really want to get tax going, they can sack a bunch of lands. But I think at this point, because I've been able to kind of present this pressure, it's kind of tough for them not to react to it. They cast Mystical Teachings, likely to find Swords to Plowshares. I go ahead and Mana Leak this just for tempo purposes, because I really want to get these walkers off the board. Jace is first priority. I'm sorry, it's not. That kind of makes sense, I guess. I knock out the Ren just to keep their card engine from going. I don't know if that's right, though. Maybe it was, because they have the Savine's Reclamation. I go ahead and just cast this Burst Lightning to knock the Jace down a bit. This is going to allow me, if they do Savine's Reclamation here... Ray of Revelation? No, they cast Savine's Reclamation here, and they get back probably the Strip Mine and the Ren and 6. The replay is likely to break at this point. I do steal the Zuran Orb because I don't want them to be able to sack their lands in response to Price of Progress. I think the replay is going to break here. But, bottom line, guys, because it's a longer game, and I think there's a lot of tutoring, and Moto's evidently broken, we kind of get behind a little bit early, but because we have the Goblin Rabblemaster as a follow-up to the opposing Ren and 6 Strip Mine play, we're able to make it such that, like, if they're going to opt to just Strip Mine every turn, they're going to be kind of in a bad spot. And then it becomes about, getting this Jace off the table, getting this Ren and 6 off the table. And then eventually stealing with Dak Fade and the Zuran Orb so they cannot sack their lands out, so that we can use a lethal Price of Progress, which is what ends up killing them, is Price of Progress here, combined with the Goblin Rabblemaster. It may have even been this turn. But I'm sorry, the replay has broken. What actually ended up happening, they did not flash back their Ray of Revelation. They flashed back their Savine's Reclamation, and I believe got back Strip Mine and Ren and 6 and cut me down to 2 lands. Which was forced me to draw to the mountain, which at this point the Cascade Bluffs was gone, and I used the Flooded Strand to find the steam vents to then cast Price of Progress to win the game. So it was a pretty interesting game. Opponent did have definitely an advantage. I think an advantage position in the like turn 3 to 4 range when they were able to resolve the Renin 6 into Jace the Mind Sculptor. But Rab's Dak kind of got us the cards we needed. Also allowed us to defeat the Winter Orb. And we were able to kind of close the game out from there with Price of Progress plus Rabble Master, which, if you have to have a threat, Rabble Master is certainly a very strong one. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 in this match. Alright, guys, we are back. Let me close this window. This hand's acceptable. It's nothing spectacular. One of the issues with it doesn't have pressure, but it's got some pitch counters, which I'm going to get rid of a Ponder. Ponder's a pretty good 1-mana spell. Got a Git Probe. Go ahead and take a look at their hand. Their hand is really good for a 5-card hand. It's Renin 6 plus a fetch land. And then Lightning Helix and Generous Gift. They're an Oath deck, so the reason they're running Generous Gift, which is basically a Beast Within, makes an elephant out of a permanent, is because they have that card. So they get back their fetch land, which is kind of problematic because, again, this hand does not have pressure. I have to just leave up Mana Leak plus this Latnam's Legacy. The idea being I kind of want to find a threat. There's a threat at least. So I know they have Helix. If they go for a Helix here, I'm just going to Mana Leak it. Or I'm going to attempt to Mana Leak it. I just go ahead and leak this. Now, on their turn, they can Helix it and kill it. But I figure that at least forces their hand on it. I can't gush out of range on that. And I couldn't put the Renin 6 to dead. So I resolve the deck this turn. I have a lot of lands. So the hand is not really panning out that well. Despite them having a 5-card hand, Renin 6 does is very powerful. They draw into an Oath of Druid, which is also problematic because my deck is going to have problems with that. Because they have a blue fetch, they're able to get back the Generous Gift, which will turn my Dak Faden more than likely into a 3/3 Elephant. So I go ahead and pitch the 2 creature cards, which kind of stinks. I'm going to have to close this game with Price of Progress, I want to say. I go ahead and attack the Renin 6. This is kind of a risky line on my part. I could have just left up the counter magic to not get elephanted here. I take a higher variance line. I want to get Renin 6 off the board because I don't think I'm beating it regardless. I try to draw to see if I can find a lightning bolt to kill this elephant. But I feel like at this point I'm too far behind. And that with Renin 6 kind of just ticking, if I don't do anything, I'm probably just going to lose the game. And I felt like the chances of finding a way to remove the elephant was actually relatively high there. So it was a very risky play. But it's one I took to see what they would do. I tried to see if they'll attack here. I did this out of sequence. I wanted to target myself and see if I could find like a way to pump the like a spell I could cast to pump the Shimra. But I do not, so I am just very dead here. An alternate and possibly more safe line, although knowing their deck, from having played them before, was to just leave up the Logic Knot to counter the gosh, I can't think, guys. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I know what I was thinking now, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, this seems like a bad line. Their Renin 6 was going to ultimate, which is the problem. And once their Renin 6 can ultimate, I'm just going to lose the game. Like, I can't beat that. Like, they're going to Generous Gift over and over and over and over again. So I could have left up Logic Knot and, not tried to, but I would have Logic Knotted the Generous Gift. But then their Renin 6 ultimates, they just cast it again. And the same thing happens. So what I ended up doing is going for like kind of a higher, it seems like a higher variance line, but I think it's a win more line. I'm sorry, this game I guess slipped my memory a bit. But what I tried to do here is one, see if I can get lucky and hit the Renin 6 down with the Wandering Fumarole, and maybe they give me the untap without using it and do it at instant speed on my turn. They're not likely to do that because I do think Nate's a pretty good player. But if they do, then like I get lucky there and I can just counter it with the Logic Knot, and then have my Dak Faden still around, which is really good because that allows me to keep on getting some card selection. So that ended up working out. They Generous Gifted on their turn, which we knew would happen. I Gush, hoping to kind of find a way to blow up the elephant, so I don't just die to Oath. But unfortunately, I don't find it. I find a bunch of lands. Eventually find this a Braid, but it's too late now. I've had to kind of commit to the board. So like what you see me do now is just commit to the board. And then with this Vendilion click play, with the intended Ben, but I misclicked through kind of the phasing there, is to bottom like the Daze or some other card and try to find like a Bolt or a Careful Study or whatever. Not a Careful Study, but like any instant speed draw spell or something like that, and then pump this this Shimra up to a 7/3 and trade off with the Gristlebrand. But they have a Gristlebrand in play. I'm probably dead, and I am. So I go ahead and pack it in here. Just didn't quite pan out. Running 6 on 2, very very strong play as it turns out. Very powerful card. Yeah, and you'll tend to struggle to beat it. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back for Game 3 against Nate here with Blue-Red Tempo. Alright, guys, back for game number 3. This hand's acceptable. It's got threats in it. They're not the most efficient threats, but it's also got a pitch counter spell, and it's also got a Stifle, which is really good against their 5-color deck that has a ton of fetch lands. So I just stifle the heck out of them here, which feels pretty good. Always has. Play out my fetch land, say go. They play out Cephalid Coliseum, which cannot be what they wanted to do for mana because it's just incremental damage. I just Lightning Bolt them here because I have this Cryptic Serpent in hand that I really want to power up. They cast a Search for Azcanta, which I could try to Gush and stop, but I'm not going to. What I am going to do is Gush this turn to make double red because I don't have 2 red sources, and play out this Crackling Drake and get a decent-sized threat down on them. They go ahead and ice my Drake, which is fine. I go ahead and opt, cast out a Cryptic Serpent for 2 mana. So I've got a boatload of power, and my deck just kind of does what it's supposed to do. The Stifle really got him there, and it's kind of able to kind of take him out. So, I mean, I did not know their hands. I mean, if they had like an Oath here, they could possibly... Actually, no, they couldn't win. If they had Oath and they tapped down for that, I get my turn back and have lethal on board, almost. Maybe not on board, but with, any burn spell plus Price of Progress in hand. They're just really dead. One of the cards, it's interesting, I'm just going to talk this card real fast, Throne of the High City. This is a card that a lot of folks, not a lot of folks, but some folks, like when they jump into the format, tend to try to play. I'm really not a fan, guys. I think this card is, it's really good in very few matchups, right? It's great value, but when you're on 5-color, I think it is just really hopeful. I think it's a tough one to play because, one, it doesn't fix your mana for you, and like in some matchups, it's going to be epic level good. Like if you're playing against like Blue-White Control, Blue Moon, maybe if they don't have the Moon down, but if you're playing down against like a heavy counter spell deck, like a big blue deck, it's really strong. But if you're playing against most anything else, it's just going to disrupt your own mana, for no reason whatsoever, and they're probably going to play creatures that threaten you, so it's going to be really tough to establish the monarchy and really maintain it. Yeah, so I'm not high on it, but some folks are. Just my take on it. The card's not that great. It's just a big commitment to do. And generally speaking, like the decks that want to play this in them, like the 2-color control decks, like they have to do it at the opposing EOT anyways. When the opposing player's kind of just out of cards and like out of gas, they've already 1-for-1'd them into the dirt, and they don't get that first draw. They have to wait a whole turn cycle, which is a thing. It's fine, I guess, but it's not really the best. Anyways, that was this matchup, guys. I'm going to go ahead and cut it and go to the next game in this series. Alright, guys, playing against Quilly Man here. We start off with a mulligan to, I believe, 5, which is not great. Go ahead and mull this down to a threat, a counter, and a burn spell, which is a pretty good hand for 5 cards. They play on a scrubland. Say, okay. I get a Stifle. One thing you'll see a lot of players do is sit on Stifle. So this is an interesting turn up here. Like they have a fetch land. I could sit on this Stifle and try to get their land, but I think that's kind of a bad play. I think the most likely use of Stifle here is to pitch to Force of Negation if they have a removal spell for this thing, because I do need to protect it. Like I'm on such a low card quantity in hand that I don't want to lose this threat. So go ahead and attack them with the Brinehorn Cutthroat. I like their fetch there at EOT. It does play around Stifle pretty well. So I go ahead and just burn them out here just to pump up my threat. Like, I feel like if they're not going to make land drops, they're going to sit there if they're like Esper Control. I'm thinking at this point like Esper Control or something like that. I've just got to force the issue. I go ahead and stifle them here. And they go and pack it in. So 5-card hand versus, I believe, a full grip. Managed to get there. One of the things that I think you'll hear a lot of like more experienced pilots say is like you got to aggressively mulligan in the format. And I was kind of talking with some folks earlier about it. I think it's a little hand wavy. It's true, like right. It's 100% true, but it's tough, right? And I think the more you get used to the deck that you're playing and like the range of decks and how your deck interacts with their decks, the more you kind of know how to do that. Which is the tough part. That's why it's like kind of tough to say like you have to mulligan aggressively because I mean, how do I mulligan against this or how do I mulligan against that? It's kind of the tough part, but even though we went to 5 this game in our opening hand, we kept a hand that stuck to the general game plan of our deck. And we're able to get there, on pretty reduced resources on the play. So yeah, kind of an interesting little game here. Quick. I'm thinking going into game 2 that I'm against Esper mid-range, Esper control, something like that. Come to find out, I am not. So we'll see a little bit more in game number 2. Be right back at you guys. Alrighty, guys, back for game number 2. So this hand's not great. I keep it because I kind of want to see what they're up to, and I have a game to give at this point. I kind of want to try the hand out. This hand's not good though. Like I would not recommend keeping this one. I'm still kind of in the dark about what they're on. I think they're on Esper control, so I'm like, I could see this hand panning out because, it has a dig through time to kind of like dig once I've kind of expended some of these cards. But like Vapor Snag's not great against them. Mental Misstep is probably fine against that kind of deck. Spell Snare is fine too against countering a counter spell. And then it's got Force of Will to kind of churn through some cards, which I expect is probably going to be Vapor Snag. And the matchup that I think I'm in, I go ahead and dump the Lightning Strike because I don't have red mana yet, and I don't think against Esper control it's going to be that good. Now I see that they're on like something else. I don't know what they're on anymore. So I see Basic Island, Scrubland, and Taiga, and I'm like, I don't know what they're doing. They're on something. They play on a plateau. So I'm figuring I'm probably going to get beat up in this matchup. Now, the one kind of interesting thing is it's not good that I'm discarding here, but it does fuel my dig through time, and like they're not doing anything, and I'm not doing anything, so I think this probably benefits me, although I'm down on mana. Make another land drop here, and I'm like, okay, this is fine, I think. They go ahead and cycle a Pale Recluse, and now I'm like, okay, I know what you're on. You're probably on like some sort of like Cascade deck, like a Hypergenesis deck, or like a Living Death deck. I get that now. I was like, oh, okay, this is what you're on. I would not have guessed that from the first game. I just go ahead and negate this because it's going to find Hypergenesis and they're going to dump their hand. Find my first red source, which is also good. And now I have access to dig through time on their EOT if they don't do anything relevant. They go ahead and I believe they drew the Hypergeny and they have to exile it with 3 time counters on it, which is just savage. That's so brutal that they drew that this turn. I kind of feel for them. This is not a good matchup for them either. Like Tempo tends to do very well against like the combo decks of the format. So here I just go ahead and resolve this thing main phase. I don't know why I did that. Probably forgot I had Flash. It was my first time playing with this card. They cast a Spite Bellows out. They go ahead and target this thing. I Vapor Snag my own guy. They go ahead and pass it back. I go ahead and re-resolve this thing on the EOT. With the Hypergeny exile, there's not a lot of ways they can cascade at instant speed for 1 mana and find something relevant here. I go ahead and get them for 2 here and get my Delver down. They go ahead and cast Demonic Dread. I let them cascade first to show me what's left in their deck. I believe there is nothing. They just show me 84 cards, and one of my creatures cannot block. They showed me their whole deck, but the Hypergeny is exiled right now. I go ahead and cycle off the Fiery Izzet because I've got plenty of mana here. Could have actually done that on my turn, but I figured my mana was going to be more relevant. So one interesting interaction here, if you're not familiar with it, it works with all the exile or the time counter cards, the suspend cards. I use Stifle Bird, Nimble Obstructionist, to actually stifle the trigger for this thing coming out of Cascade, so it stays in Cascade forever. I could have also countered the spell, but I figured that Nimble Obstructionist really doesn't add a significant amount to the clock. It's still going to be 2 turns to kill them. And it's better just to save the counter spells for something else, like a big threat, and just stifle Hypergenesis because it is an answer to a suspend card. So let's go ahead and pack it in here. Not a great matchup for Hypergenesis, going into game 2, like I think my hand was infinitely like I didn't know my hand that I opened on in this game was going to be. It was actually a really good hand against Hypergenesis because it's got Force of Will, it's got a bunch of counter magic. It's going to be really tough for them to get through that. So it ended up working out pretty well for me that I kept that hand. But I think in the dark, that hand was probably something that you would pitch back because it didn't really adhere to kind of like the plan, the guidebook to the deck where you want to present early pressure by turn 2 and then protect it. As opposed to that, and because of the matchup that I was in, without knowing that I was in that matchup, I was able to kind of delay that game plan because I had so much permission and time really to try to find it. But you can kind of also play that same game plan against Control because they're not going to kill you fast. They're going to have to generally play big clunky spells. Then you just counter their one big clunky spell after they've been drawing and cantripping, and win from there with your little threats. So anyways, guys, quick pause, and I will be back momentarily for the next match in the series of games. Alright, guys, back. So we're playing against Munwolf, new player to the format. So I have no clue what their predilections are as far as play going into this game specifically. I'm playing again with Tempo, and I'm unfortunately starting off again on a mulligan. So I mulligan my 7. This is my 6. I think I keep this. This looks like a decent enough hand. Yeah, I get rid of Grim Lavamancer. Grim is maybe a card you can cut from the deck entirely, but I still kind of like it as like an odd. It helps the odds a bit versus like the aggressive decks. It's also not a horrible clock on its own, and it pressures Planeswalkers. I go ahead and opt here. It's an interesting play, but my thought is like I would like to be able to leave up Lightning Bolt plus Spell Snare on the next turn. The reason it's kind of like a little bit dubious is because I have these Faerie Vandal, which Faerie Vandal can get pumped by the opt later. I just go ahead and cast this thing on my main phase. Thought Scour to pump it. I know what I'm against now. I'm against some sort of Academy deck, and I feel like because they committed a Lotus Petal and had a tap land plus that Signet, they were on kind of a hopeful plan to get going. I go ahead and get rid of this Vision and the Pyromancer. I don't think the game is going to go that terribly long because I'm going to have... Basically, I have 9 power worth of damage in my hand, plus board. So go ahead and look at their hand. Don't take anything. They have no lands, so they can't do anything. Their hand looks great. I mean, it's got a lot of powerful cards, but it doesn't do much. I go ahead and cycle off my land here. I've got 2 counter spells plus 7 power on board, put them down to 10, and then I've got them at lethal next turn. They don't draw land again, so as soon as the EOT hits, I go ahead and bolt them to tell them, hey, you're dead. They let me go through it, so I attack them here for exactly lethal. So, again, another kind of like combo strategy. It's more like a big mana deck. You can call it a combo deck. But the way it works is it gets, Paradox Engine plus a draw artifact like Mystic Forge, like Sensei's Divining Top, and then just habitually cast card after card and untaps their artifact mana to draw their whole deck and then play like a, possibly infinitely large, I don't know if it's infinite, but probably close enough. Walking Ballista, Emrakul, whatever, you name it. It doesn't really matter how this deck wins that I'm playing against, but it does require very specific parts. So whenever a deck requires like very specific components, and if you understand how that deck kind of runs and what those specific components are, Tempo tends to be really good because you can kind of just attack them along like one you can continue to apply consistent pressure and then disrupt that one axis. So in certain games against Academy with Tempo, you want to disrupt their mana, which I did here because they committed a lot of resources to get their turn 2 Signet down, and because I think in general Spell Snare is not going to get much better unless they're on a Volt deck. So I attack their mana here, but in some matchups they're just going to be like turn 1 Soul Ring plus, Grim Monolith plus, Basalt Monolith go, and it's like, all right, you're not going to attack the mana from that standpoint. You're going to counter the power cards like Paradox Engine or, like massive draw spells or threats. But because they're very dependent upon their ramp spells, their ramp artifact mana, they're going to have less business just as a matter of course, and it's going to generally tend to be fairly expensive business. And if you can counter it with negate or miscalc or something like that, you can kind of attack along that axis. So, in this matchup, how you play the Tempo deck really depends on their starts, and how the game progresses. But in this game specifically, I attack their mana, their mana development off of their signets, etc. Because I thought it was going to be a point of failure for the hand they had kept, and it ended up panning out. Quick pause, guys. Be back momentarily with the next game in this match. Alrighty, guys, we're back. This hand's not great because it doesn't have a threat, but I keep it. They're kind of a newer player, and I kind of want to, play a little bit longer of a game. It's kind of like the rationale for why I did it. But the hand's also not horrible either. They cast out a Ballista here after I've seen their hand. I just go ahead and Vapor Snag it because I want to see if they want to throw it at me. And I don't mind getting the spell in the bin for the Cryptic Serpent. This just doesn't have a fast threat, but Cryptic Serpent is going to kill them. It's pretty quick once you get it going. So they cast out the Walking Ballista here. They don't have access to the Mox Opal mana, so I can't Force Spike this. If they did have 4 mana, they probably would have tapped all 4. I go ahead and Chain Lightning this. I expect them to throw it at me. Like I said, they're a little newer, so they don't toss it at me. And yeah, they don't get their 1 damage in. I do go ahead and Force Spike this more Power Stone, because if I don't, I'm probably not going to be able to Force Spike anything from this point forward. I go ahead and cast out Cryptic Serpent, leaving open the Volk for whatever reason. Price of Progress plus Cryptic Serpent are going to make fast work of him here. They go ahead and draw here, which is fairly aggressive. I guess it makes sense if they're not making a land drop or playing card. So I go ahead and resolve this Storm Chaser. Go to combat, attack, and then cast Price of Progress for, I believe, lethal? No, I'm short. I'm short by about 2 here, I think. I want to leave up Counterspell here. I'll let them resolve their artifact mana, their Headrun Archive, the next card they play. None of this really matters right now. It's all just mana. So, like, this is the sort of game where, like, I only have 2 counters in hand. I want to counter business spells. The mana is fine. They're down to 2 cards. But if they have something that's relevant that stops me from winning, like, for instance, what is the card called? Ensnaring Bridge, or a way of winning themselves, like a draw 7. I'm going to counter that, but the mana is not really relevant here because I have lethal on the following turn. I go ahead and cast Price of Progress, putting them to 4 and attacking them for 9 or whatever, and get them here on turn 6 with some decent interaction still in hand. So again, pretty tough matchup for Academy. It can definitely win the matchup, but it's a harder one. And that's kind of why one of the big pulls to playing Tempo is that you can beat up on some of the most powerful decks that are in the format, like Storm or like Academy. Anyways, guys, quick pause, and we'll be back for the next game in this series of games. Alrighty, so we're playing against Paranundrux, which, as their name would, I suppose, somewhat imply, they're also a Paradox Engine / Academy player. So, again, fairly decent matchup for our deck. This hand's acceptable. It's nothing stellar against Paradox Academy, but it's okay. If they play Island Go, I feel pretty good about it. Excuse me. So here, I'm going to opt to just play out my threat, get pressure. I think some of the times if players are new to Tempo, like if they're against a really powerful deck like Paradox Academy, they'll want to leave up their counter spells. This is not a matchup where I think you cannot not apply pressure to them. You got to get pressure on them. And while Storm Chaser Mage is kind of not that great of pressure, it is pressure. I am going to counter this Warren Power Stone because I think it's going to buy me more time. I also have Dak in hand, but I kind of want to just use my cards. I'll go ahead and counter this. And it also limits what they're able to do on the following turns. Now, another thing I could have done here is play the Dak to steal their land. I'd rather use Dak to steal, like, an engine piece. So if they play, like, a Mystical Forge or Mystic Forge or Aetherflux Reservoir or something like that, I'd rather steal that with Dak. I could have done it there to limit their next turn's play. I go ahead and get Narset off the board, so if they cast a draw 7 on their following turn, I don't just get, like, completely goozled by it. And at this point, I steal their mana because they're very dead on the next turn. And I have Force Spike available, so limiting them by 1 mana could be very relevant. Like I said, just go ahead and Force Spike them here. They go ahead and pack it in to Force Spike here because I believe they are dead to boot up and attack with all. Yes, it's 4. Yeah, it's very lethal with the Goblin Rabble Master. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for game number 2 against Paranundrox's build of Paradox Academy. All right, guys, back. So this is a risky hand, but I'm all about it. I'll be honest. I'm going to keep this on the draw, especially. These hands can sometimes not pan out. They play out a defense grid, so I go ahead Ancestral here. This hand luckily has a lot of business in it, though. I'm going to have to discard a card here, but I think that's okay. The Ancestral Vision is just way too slow for this matchup. It's a good card, but it's, unfortunately, that card may need to get cut, honestly. Because this hand's so proactive, I don't really care that much about the defense grid. They go ahead and cycle here. So I'm actually at pretty significant risk of losing this game. And actually, let me pause it, because this is actually a really important decision. So I'm at pretty big risk of losing this game. Because they have the defense grid, I have to just basically play to the board and threaten their life total as much as possible. They are able to wheel on their turn, so they have a full grip of 7, which gives a good probability with them having Tolarian Academy and an untapper on the board of me just being dead. So one of the interesting things post-draw 7 is that I have access to Mystical Tutor. Because they have a defense grid, I'm not going to counter anything relevant. So like getting Force of Will or something like that is just not an option, and which may be a card that I end up trying to get if they did not have defense grid in play. Another option is to get like a Braid and blow up like defense grid, or honestly, if I was going to blow an artifact up here with a Braid, it would probably be Warm Power Stone. Just to limit their options on the next turn, because I don't have pitch counter magic in hand, so if I tap out, like, I'm kind of, at that point, like, conceding the game if they just have it. So I'd rather just limit their resources as opposed to, like, blowing up the defense grid for follow-up turns to have, like, Negate and Ark Mages Charm open. But what I have to instead do is use the Mystical Tutor on my upkeep to get the Price of Progress. The reason I do this is because this actually limits them by a full turn cycle. I could have saved to try to get more damage in the next turn, but like they're going to be dead on the following turn regardless. Is the expectation. So I kind of like getting Price of Progress here. I'm not sure if it's correct. It's a very close line. But I think when put in these situations where they have basically a draw 7 that's 2 draw 7 stapled together and they're going to see a ton of cards, I have to get a little lucky. I just have to get a little lucky, especially because my counter spells all say brick on them. So I go for the proactive line and Price of Progress them and attack them for a boatload of damage. And say, hey, have it this turn or die, basically. So they try to develop as much as possible to build equity in this Silurian Academy. Go ahead and flashback the Echo of Aeons. I've got 5 points of burn in hand, but they have a Thopter Foundry, and they have used the Muddle the Mixture to find a Sword of the Meek. Unfortunately, they're not able to kind of get the mana together, and because I have this Forked Bolt, I'm able to get through their attacker or their blocker rather, and hit them for exactly lethal. So I get a little lucky here. I have a very fast kill, but that's kind of one of the things the deck's designed to do too, right? Like, sometimes you're going to have hate pieces played against you, like, this defense grid. And it needs to have the flexibility. This deck needs to have the flexibility to not just be a counterspell deck, to actually be a deck that, like, in situations like this, you can just go, to the wall and just hit them with everything you got. And, still kill them by turn 5. Which is certainly, like, not a fast kill for the format. Like, there are decks that can turn 1 with optimal hands. And most aggressive decks are going to ideally fish around turn 4. But turn 5 is also no slouch. It's still a pretty quick, choppy clock. It's gonna, put someone down pretty quick if they don't hit the marks they need to hit. And here, like, we're talking about this game afterwards. There was a chance that, like, if they had played this turn out a little bit differently, dumped a little less of their pre Echo the Aeons hand, they would have possibly had access to more. Making more tokens with Thopter Foundry off Muddle the Mixture. But I don't know, it's a very close line, and I think, they had a very high probability of winning this game, but it just didn't pan out. That's kind of one of the things with the draw 7s is, you live by them, you die by them sometimes. And I think when you're playing from the opposite end, like, I do think I like my line with Price of Progress. I think you just got to say, hey, I can't counter your spells, like, just have it or die. That's kind of what we did, and, it ended up panning out pretty well for us here, and we ended up getting a para as opposed to having to go to a Game 3. Quick pause, guys. Be back momentarily with more gameplay. Alrighty, guys. We're back. I'm playing against Shivan Masticore. This hand looks agreeable. It does have a slow threat in it. It's got a spell snare in it. It's got this Ark Mage's Charm, and then a Price of Progress. So it's got, 2 decent win cons, some counter magic, and or, multiple utility off Ark Mage's Charm if I hit mana. I'm fine with it. Not spectacular. I see what I'm against. I'm like, ooh, no. This is Sui. But being fair, like, Thing in the Ice is not bad versus Sui Black. Unfortunately, they don't opt to play a 2-drop here, so this is kind of unfortunate because it's going to kind of, leave the spell snare kind of stranded in my hand. They get in for 1 and then use the Extort off of their card. I go ahead and sequence out the island as opposed to the red source because I don't think Price of Progress is going to be very good in this matchup, and Ark Mage's Charm may be relevant. They go ahead and attack here for a little bit of damage. I draw an Ancestral Recall, which is generally a very good card to draw. I think I could have done this turn better. So they play Black Lotus, which is pretty powerful. And honestly, it's not irrelevant here, even though you kind of want to have this card in your opener on Mono Black aggro decks. I think this is the Boggy Boys version of Mono Black aggro with a ton more flyers. I think in general, it's probably a worse version of Mono Black, just because, like, well, you do have more evasion. Your clocks are a little slower and a little more fragile. Not that Sui Black's threats are, like, exceedingly resilient, but there are some recursive ones, and, like, 2 power is just a big benchmark for 1 mana. So I think you didn't want to be there. They cast a Black Lotus here, resolve a Vampire Cutthroat. Can't counter it. Cast out an Eye Collector. Can't counter that either. I mean, I could counter it with Ark Mage's Charm, but I'm not going to. I think I make a misplay here. I think I should have just Ark Mage's Charmed like their Eye Collector and blocked one of these things. Blocked the Nightshade, whatever this thing is, Nightshade Stinger. And or possibly, like, I couldn't have force spiked anything. So I guess maybe I should have tried to look for a counter there to counter some of this stuff. But my thinking is, like, I want to try to build equity in this thing in the ice and then get this stuff on the backswing. They're going to be choked on mana because they've used, Black Lotus and, like, a couple turns to resolve all this stuff. So my thinking is like maybe I can get them good with. I unfortunately clicked through begin combat step here. What I intended to do is Ark Mages Charm one of these things, and then just eat them because I'm not going to quite flip them yet, and I kind of want to prevent some of the damage. They cast down a Dreadkin Mannequin or Malkin, Dreadkin Malkin. So I just go ahead and draw here because I screwed up. I don't want to further screw up by just taking one of these things post-combat because it's going to go back to their hand eventually anyways. I just cast Price of Progress to knock all this junk back to their hand. Get in there for 7. They've gained a lot of life off of their cards, so it's going to be really tough for me to kind of get back into this. Not impossible, but very tough. They cast out the Eye Collector, cast out the Dread Mannequin, and cast out a Sleeper Agent, which I do Force Spike. The Sleeper Agent will kill me on my upkeep if it is able to resolve. I could also stifle it, though. I guess I could stifle the trigger. Yeah. So I get down to Soulscar Mage. Right now, I'm not quite on a one-turn clock. I'm going to get hit by the Eye Collector, so I don't have a flying threat. They can attack with the Dread Malkin, which has Menace, and make it a 3/3 and eat my Soulscar Mage, but the Awoken Horde would still get it. I go ahead and counter the Ultra Fate. So they can't get back the Sleeper Agent, which again would kill me unless I stifle it. I go ahead and miscalc the Nightshade Peddler. There's a question here if I want to just cycle that, try to find like a burn spell that deals with 2 threats. I draw into Young Pyromancer. I'm dead to the flyer here. So I end up dying here. I don't know if this missequence on, or just it's really a misclick. I mean, like I honestly intended to use Ark Mage's Charm to steal one of their things and then block one of their things. Well, the Thing in the Ice / Awoken Horde was on 2 counters. But I just clicked through begin combat, and they got the attack step in. So took the draw fit instead. Based on how the draws worked out after that, I don't think it would have made a huge difference. Although, that said, like it would have gotten rid of 2 of their 1-mana threats, which would have allowed me to probably use Spell Snare a little more effectively there. But then again, I would have been, 2 less cards deep in my deck, and from what we've seen, like I've drawn a couple islands, I probably would have died anyways. So I don't know if it mattered. I mean, that's kind of results-oriented thinking. I think the right play still was to Ark Mage's Charm to steal one of the 1-drops, begin combat, and then block one of the flying 1-drops to kind of clean up the air. But yeah, misclicks happen. Mistakes happen. And I do think it was right after we made the misplay or the mistake to Ark Mage's Charm, EOT, and draw at that point. So yeah, end up losing this first one. This is a tougher matchup though. So like this build of Sui is a little bit less punchy than like what I call the pure build of it, like the Carnophage version of it. But decks that run a lot of very efficient cards, like this deck is a Black Lotus Mox deck, and run just a ton of 1-drops and 2-drops that just are 2/1s in attack, turn sideways, tend to overwhelm this style of deck to a larger extent. Because our means of board control are a little more limited. I'm not running cards like Arc Trail. I'm honestly not running Fire Ice, which some folks may say is a mistake, and maybe it is. I just think it's a little bit too expensive and a little bit too situational, despite being a very good card. I'm not running like Electrolyze. I'm running like Forked Bolt, which is probably the best thing to deal with their kind of threats. And then I have a bunch of burns, so if they put like auras or enchantments or equipment on them, I can kind of blow them out that way, like eat some of their mana up that way. But in general, my removal is going to be it's going to be on the same CMC or more expensive CMC-wise than their cards are going to be, which, the reason counterspells are good is because they cost much less than what they're countering, right? Like, they're trading up for mana. So you're, in a way, quote-unquote, time-walking them. Sorry about that. Yep, my McAfee protection has canceled. Get out of here. So yeah, that's kind of one of the issues you run into is like I'm casting like a Searing Spear to kill a 1-drop or something like that. It's just you're down mana in that exchange, and you're at card parity, which is not really where you want to be when you're using removal. You want it to be cheaper than the card you're killing with it. In general, that's kind of how you gain tempo, right? You just basically use up their mana for little effect, but aggro is basically pure tempo, let's say, and it's just trying to kill you fast. So it could be a tough matchup, very challenging. So we end up dying here. I don't think if we had not had that misclick, we would have won. But I think we would have been probably in better stead. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Boggy Boys or Sui Black. All right, guys, we are back. This hand looks great. We got Forked Bolt. Forked Bolt is great. I'm also on the play. So I get to sleight of hand here, turn 1. off my island. Fundamental Misstep, which is pretty cool. I could have taken, I think it was the other card was a bird. Like a Dillion Click or something. But I'd rather have the 1-mana counter. I'm just going to counter this. I could Forked Bolt it, but because Forked Bolt is not instant speed, I'm a little less high on it. But maybe I should have let it resolve and just killed it on my turn. I don't know. Yeah, because I guess I could have countered this. Maybe that was wrong. I think it's close either way. I mean, I think just having them not have a threat on board is really good, though. Because they have, like, Unholy Strength and stuff like that. They can get out of range. Like, a couple, like, Unholy Strengths or, like, just cards that pump creatures like enchantments. Could be problematic because then I'm not going to be able to Forked Bolt it. But so here I just go ahead and cast out my bird because I want to get a threat on them. They go ahead and discard my Forked Bolt. I'm kind of happy with that exchange, though. I get a Storm Chaser down, cast out a Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Gush to pump my Storm Chaser Mage, and go ahead and attack. I'm just trying to push maximum damage while they're kind of mana screwed here. I have this Jace Vryn's Prodigy, so if they get their land drop or a Black Lotus or something and resolve multiple threats, I can get Forked Bolt back and like remove them. It sounds like heresy to say that I get Forked Bolt back over Ancestral, but I think there's honestly, like, against this deck, a 50-50 chance of either. I have a lot of lands in hand, so I haven't like really drawn that well off that Gush. So like, Ancestral would be nice, but I kind of commit to a plan like of this is what I've got, you're not developing, so I'm going to kill you fast with this Enigma Drake, with this Nimble Obstructionist, with this Storm Chaser Mage, and I want to use Jace here to, more than likely actually get back this Forked Bolt to deal with whatever they resolve next. If you're kind of unfamiliar with like the Boggy Boys variant of Sui Black, it runs less optimal but more evasive threats, and to complement the smaller threats, like there's a lot of 1/1 flyers in the deck, it tends to run auras, enchantment-based damage pushers. So if you're able to kind of remove a lot of their early drops, and they get stranded with like some Dark Favors or some Unholy Strengths in hand, it can be very rugged because those cards don't do anything without a creature on the board. So that was kind of the plan, and it ends up working out here. They get mana screwed, but again, like Sui Black, like it may look like they're in a rough spot. They obviously are at this point, but you don't need a lot of lands to run with it. You can definitely win games with 0 lands. Like if you just have Black Lotus plus Mox, Chrome Mox, Mox Jet, you can win very easily with those hands with never actually seeing a land drop. Frankly, could have gone either way up until a point. I think once I got this Nimble Obstructionist down and they just hadn't done anything for 2 turns, I'm pretty much golden. So yeah, go ahead and go to the next game, guys. Got this one. Not really a great game, but it's kind of how it's going to be in Sui. They're either going to overrun you, or they're going to kind of fail to launch, or they're going to launch out there with a Dark Ritual, and you're going to use your burn to remove whatever they play, and they're going to be kind of down on mana, and only able to one spell each turn. And we want opponents one spelling each turn as opposed to dumping hands, because that's kind of where tempo wants to be. Just trade, get board advantage, and then trade 1 a turn. Is kind of it. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for game number 3 against Shivan Mastercore on Boggy Boys. All right, back for game 3. Now we're on the draw, so it's going to be hard mode. This hand's fine. So before we go into it, it's got a Mystical Tutor, which, as I said, Mystical Tutor is kind of in this deck to flex between Ancestral Recall and Price of Progress. But the bigger thing with this hand is, it's got a threat, it's got some burn for board control, and it's got a counter spell for disruption and a Searing Spear for disruption. So I like this hand. It's pretty good. They Dark Ritual. I'm like, okay. And Dark Ritual is really not that big of a deal because I feel pretty good against it because I've got this Mystical Tutor if I really need to get something big, like a bounce spell like the Brazen Borrower to bounce any card they do this to. And I can also Searing Spear the Heir of the Wild on my next turn, which I'm going to opt to do because, if they have, pump spells for it or more enchantments, I don't want to just, or instant speed pump spells or, not Unholy Strength, Undying Evil, stuff like that. I really don't want to get blown out by that, so I just go ahead and tap out for killing it on my turn. They go ahead and Cruel Bargain to draw 4 and lose half their life, which is a very all-in card. I don't know if it's correct, but it's very powerful. I think it was a Rockstar in old Prosbloom decks. So they cast Alter Fate here, one of the adventure halves of this card. I go ahead and just Spell Snare it. They resolve a Skulk lifelinking threat. I go ahead and Mystical Tutor for, I believe, Ancestral here. I want to get down the Thing in the Ice this turn. I kind of want to get a threat down at this point, and it could be Delver, but I think Thing in the Ice is just going to be better in case they rapidly expand on the board. So they get a 4/2 lifelink, which is not great. I mean, they're going to go up on life, but I mean, they're already at 12 because of the damage they did off Cruel Bargain. And I know I can deal with this card via my Stomp here, which I just go ahead and stomp this thing out right away. And get in for 2 with my Monastery Swiftspear, putting them at a 10. And it kind of gives me options. The following turn, I can, resolve this 4/3, or I can incinerate their threat. What I have to do is play it pretty safe and get the Delver down, and then leave up Incinerate, just in case they use some sort of enchantment on this thing or some aura to really pump it. So they go ahead and play Tyrant's Choice. I have to take 4 here. I go ahead and blow this thing up. They play on a Blood Scrivenger, which is a little annoying because they're at 0 cards. They're going to draw two a turn at this point. Misdirection is kind of nice in case they have they draw Caravax Spite. They don't have to block here, so I give them some damage here. They go ahead and cast out a Gurmag Swiftwing, and then Bump in the Night. So they put me down to 3. I could have counter Bump in the Night, but they can actually flashback it with Black Lotus, which is really, it's not an interaction you see very often in this deck. So technically they could have actually tried to kill me there. I would have countered it, and it would have kept a threat off the board. I attack with all, just because they are going to get to eat my 1 threat, but I kind of want to push the damage, get them down to 1. They go and attempt to cast this spell. I just go ahead and deprive it. You actually cannot misdirect that card. It's only opponents. They cast out a Tormented Soul. And on my next turn, I'm just going to go ahead and bounce the board with just casting, I think, Chartercourse or something. Bounce the board and attack in for lethal for 7 here. So they got me down to 3. I mean, they had some pretty sick draws, after kind of a slower start. They were able to push a lot of damage with their enchantments, but I was kind of able to, 2-for-1 them quite a few times in the early to mid game. But they pushed a lot of damage and were able to get me very, very low. As you can see, this, tends to be a more challenging matchup. This style of deck tends to be a more challenging matchup for tempo. Your red deck wins, your Sui Blacks, your Stompy, White Weenie Stompy decks tend to be kind of tough. You could even say just literal Stompy, mono green aggro, can be pretty tough for it because their threat density is really high and it tends to be really cheap. So they can 2-spell very early, and it's pretty tough for you to kind of keep pace with them as far as pushing damage goes. But we managed to kind of pull this one through. Kind of unfortunate draw in Game 2, or maybe bad keep, hard to tell. And then this Game 3 kind of had a tight one here, up until the end. My funnel was definitely mana here. I just wasn't able to deploy everything I had available to me, in a timetable to really, make my cards useful, right? So, if they had, a Caravax Spite or something like that, a Spite wouldn't have got me because I had Misdirection, literally. But if they had multiple more burn spells, then I could have been in a lot of trouble here. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go on a quick pause. We'll be back for another game that I'll be covering with this deck. Alrighty, we're back, guys. So this hand's fine. It's lacking kind of a threat that is going to be cast reliably. But, I've never played Camp Killer 1-3-1-1. I think they're newer to the format. And, it's got a gush, it's got some card draw, it's got some counter magic. I'll try it out. I'm also on the play, so Force Spike on the play tends to be kind of fun. It's possibly better on the draw, honestly, but it's fine either way. Force Spike, I love the card. I don't know if it's caused to be played in every deck, but I think it's great in this style of deck. They go ahead and peek, so they know I've got a Force Spike at this point. I could Force Spike the Faithless Looting, but I'm not going to. It's not card advantage, I don't really know what they're on. My guess is probably one of their first builds or early builds. You don't tend to see Simic Guildgate in a lot of decks, so they could be building like a Rug Tempo deck on a budget. The first thing I actually think when I see Simic Guildgate is they're on a Guildgates deck, some crazy Guildgates deck, but they're not. What it looks like they're on is some sort of tempo based deck, like a Rug Tempo deck, which is kind of cool. Be a cool matchup. The Tempo Mirror, which tends to be kind of interesting. Alright, so, yeah, I can't really do much. I can stop, a 3-mana threat here if they play it. Terramander I can't stop, which is kind of spooky. They play on a Quirion Dryad, which I just go ahead and counter here. And now I'm kind of in the game plan of, looking for burn. I do get my tap land here, because I guess I don't need to get the Volcanic. Sometimes you'll get Volcanic in those situations over Steam Vents, even though the typical play is to get Steam Vents if it's EOT and you're not using the mana. But with Gush, if you have to bounce it back, sometimes shocking it back in can be a lot of damage. not going to have their board blanked for a little bit, but I do kind of want to find some burn. I go ahead and cast out this Monastery Swiftspear Gush back to my islands, try to find burn. Find some burn. Go ahead and Burst Lightning the Homunculus. Fetch here to find my Volk. Cast out the Direfleet Daredevil, getting their Faithless Looting to get rid of these 2 lands I have in hand, or whatever the 2 worst spells are, probably 1 land at least. I go ahead and get rid of Soulscar Mage. I'd like to make my land drop next turn, and this Cryptic Serpent is going to be pretty castable. One cool thing is here, like I feel like at this point, like even though they're going to be able to buff up their Terramander, I am going to be able to push a lot of damage. They're going to be forced on the defensive here. One of the things I could say, Giant Growth this. I'm like, okay. And then they buff it. I just let it trade. What I want to do here is force them to counter on their upkeep, and then be able to use Force of Negation on their turn to force of negate their counter spell. So it out tempos them. And then I get to steal the Terramander. So I mean, they ate my threat, the Crackling Drake. My Crackling Drake did draw me a card. So trading it off there, is kind of tempoing myself, but it's also setting up a pretty high value play of Ark Mages Charming their Terramander. They've committed a lot of mana and resources to, in doing it over 2 turn cycles. They weather the storm, which is an interesting one to see, and I actually asked them if they were playing Niv Magus Elemental, because that would actually make sense to play Weather the Storm with Niv Magus Elemental. But it could also just be technology against storm decks, or maybe even aggressive decks, aggressive decks that have a flurry of burn spells, then you just resolve Weather the Storm. It's kind of interesting. I don't see it a ton in the Rug decks, but it's definitely an interesting include. I don't know if it's correct, but it does have very powerful metagame applications. So it's very, very interesting. And if you were to be playing Niv Magus Elemental, which you're not familiar with that card, it is a hybrid mana Izzet card, so blue-red card, cast for a hybrid mana widget, 1/2, I believe, and it says exile target instant or sorcery, put 2 +1/+1 counters in Niv Magus Elemental. So with storm cards, you can stack up a storm card and exile 8 copies of it or whatever, and have a 20, not a 20, but a 17, 18 or whatever. But yeah, I kind of just out tempo him here. This card's pretty cool too. Silver for Partisan. I don't see this one a lot either, but it's actually not bad. If you're playing just a fistful of pump spells, you can make a boatload of 2/2s out of nowhere and kind of win in combat pretty well with it. Also has Trample, which is kind of nice in the green style decks. So another big thing you get when you start jumping over into green for the green based or the green blue or the green red blue tempo decks is you get Trample, which is pretty cool when you start jumping into pump spells and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a lot of ways you replace Price of Progress in that style of deck where you have more duels. But anyways, kind of managed to get him here, just kind of overrun him. Am able to protect the queen or just expand further than they are, and they don't end up with a lot of cards on board that are able to kind of out tempo me, as it were. Well, I still have some cards in hand. I'm trying to think. Did I Ancestral this game? I Gush this game. Gush is really the deal breaker this game. I don't know. I don't remember what I found off of Gush, but being able to Gush and also getting 2-for-1 advantage off of Direfleet Daredevil post Gush was just a lot of card advantage. So we outcarded them, and then due to having those extra resources, we're able to have more board impact and close the game faster than they were. So that's kind of how it rolls. I think honestly, a lot of times Rug versus blue red is a little coin tossy, a little draw dependent. My power cards, tend to be Price of Progress because it represents a ton of damage at instant speed, so you're able to kind of control the pace of how they present threats because there's always a risk of just dying to it. And then obviously the card draw, I think, tends to be really relevant. You always want to have board impact, but the tempo mirrors tend to be very resource intensive. Because you have such a wide range of cards in both decks, i.e. pump spells are not great on their own. For me, sometimes some of my threats are going to be irrelevant, or some of my burn could be irrelevant. Most of their threats are burnable, but you don't want to burn off a silver for Partisan because you're just going to make another 2/2. It's not great, is what I'm saying. Sometimes you have to do it, but it's just not great. So really, it's about finding those relevant cards in the matchup and then kind of riding them to a victory. It's generally pretty incremental. But if one player kind of gets a snowball, an early advantage, like what I kind of did here, it tends to snowball. And I tend to find that it happens along the card resource line of the game. Anyways, guys, quick pause. Be back momentarily for the next game in this match. That is not the pause button. Alrighty, guys, we're back for our next game against Camp Killer. I wonder if it's like a Jason reference. I just think about their name now. This hand's a little bit dicey. I get lucky and draw links. I'm a sack. What I was trying to do here is I had Mystical Tutor, and I was like, all right, I have Mystical Tutor to find Ancestral and just be really up on resources, and I can follow it up with a 1-mana play. I draw the land like a sack that I am. I just go ahead and find Ancestral here. I believe I opt just to play out my threat. I actually do this on their upkeep. The reason I do this is because, I do open myself up to Spell Pierce. I am able to protect it from like Force of Will, Daze, and like their own Force of Negation by doing it on their upkeep there. I wouldn't have had to discard, so like I could see like some folks maybe wanting to Ancestral on your own turn, but you don't have to. I think it's better to protect it because I think it's so important in the matchup. And that's kind of one of the reasons I kept the hand, even though it was mana light. Like I really wanted access to those extra cards to kind of just basically like do this 1-for-1, this dance of 1-for-1, and just be up 3 extra cards at the end of it, or really 2. So I get peaked on here. And I believe, unless Moto breaks, I actually just memory lapse this, so I have to redraw it. It looks like the replay may be broken. So I'm going to do guys' pause so we can kind of go through this game. If it fails again, I'm just going to go ahead and describe the game, and then I'll probably cut the video there. So, here we go. All right, memory lapse worked. Moto's working again. I guess I had to cut the video. So they peek this time. See my hand. It's a pretty good hand, I think. It doesn't have a ton of threats. Well, it just got one. I go ahead and look for a land drop here. Price of Progress is also just really good. It's not doing a ton of damage yet, but it's going to, is my thought. They go ahead and cast Perilous Voyage. I let this happen. I can fight this, but like I don't see a big reason to fight it on my turn. They're the ones that have to present something on their like board impact on their turn. I also let this resolve. I actually don't counter it here because I would prefer to use my Mana Leak against whatever their counter spell is. As opposed to my Pact of Negation. They have Blossoming Defense, which, makes sense. I can see why they'd play it, because they knew my hand. So the Incinerate does happen here. The other cool thing about this is it allows me to use my mana efficiently. I find an island here because I don't want to Price of Progress myself anymore than I have to, and I get in for 5 off of my Terramander. It just leaves more resources for later, because, Force of Negation is a pitch counter. They go ahead and remand this. I say, okay, I could Force of Will it, but I'm not really killing this turn. And they cast a Wee Dreadnoughts. I go ahead and Force of Will this, because I'm at a point where I just want to keep them from having board impacting plays like, removal and or threats of their own. So real quick, there's a lot of the format's been expanding a lot. Just talk through Berserk real fast. So opponent has a misplay here because I think they're just maybe not, they haven't played a lot of Berserk. It's not a card you really commonly play. You could play it in like Legacy, in fact. That's about it. But they're trying to use Berserk as a removal spell. So the way Berserk actually works, just for folks who maybe haven't used the card before, and I talked with them, but I was like, oh yeah, man, like I would have in real life I would have let them take it back and be like, oh yeah, that doesn't work that way. I don't know if it would have mattered in this game, but what they're trying to do is kill my Terramander. So the way Berserk works is the creature has to have attacked. So you basically have to do it on your opponent's turn, and they can attack with their card. To actually use it as a removal spell. It's not a great one because it does damage to you, and it's it does kill the card. Against Terramander, it's not great because it's going to do 10. Once it's what is it, adapted for. So yeah, a little bit of a misplay here with the Berserk, but I don't know if it mattered that much. I think they were kind of in a sticky wicket anyways. But at this point, the game's it kind of plays itself. We have the damage we need in hand. I don't know why I cast this Rabble Master, and I guess I wasn't trying to style on them. I think I was just like, yeah, I'll cast it out. It's not relevant here. I go ahead and get him with the Terramander for 6, and then cast a lethal Price of Progress for 4. Put him -1. The Rabble Master was irrelevant, though. I don't know why I played it out. That was kind of my bad. But anyways, that's the last match I'm going to show. So kind of a decent range of different matchups. I actually don't think I dropped a game with this deck in the last like 48 hours. I've been kind of on a tear playing with it. It's one of my favorite. Like this style of deck is one of my favorite decks to play. Like blue green, blue red. Like they're so much fun. Like I don't know if they're my favorite, but like they're really fun to play because they just have so much gaming and so many things, and like they really they put you at a lot of decision points in the game, which is like really interesting to me. And not all of it's like technical play. It's like judgment based decisions, kind of on the matchup, kind of on the opponent, how they play. There's a lot to it, and it's kind of fun for me because I mean, if you do it wrong, you can just get utterly just the crap beaten out of you on these decks because they have like some draft some draft reject cards in them. They also have some very powerful cards in them too. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of very powerful, like Ancestral Recall is no slouch, but then you have cards like I don't know. I guess Monastery Switch is a bad example too, like Faerie Vandal, that you play in them just for the sake of being flash and buffing with cards. Brightehorn Cutthroat, which I guess did see some play too in blue green and standard. Either way, they kind of got some Miracle Growy effects, and when you're playing a format that has Black Lotuses in it, you tend to think a lot of the cards, like the creature-based threats that you have in these style of decks, would kind of become irrelevant, would kind of be like relegated to being D tier. But playing a strategy like this, go figure. When you put blue with it, can tend to be very powerful, very good against like a lot of the decks in the format. But that all said, I think there's a lot of benefit to pilot experience with them as well, because I think when you initially pick them up, they can be a little bit unforgiving, but I tend to think that's a good thing because it allows you to kind of learn the format, and it's a lot easier to kind of get into bad habits if you're just winning all the time with the deck. Like if you just and I'm not saying there's anything against jamming red deck wins, but it'll tend to win a lot of games for you, right? And that's not a bad thing. Like in a tournament, if you were not comfortable with like a tempo deck, I would not suggest you run it, because if you go to a tournament, you want to win. But I guess my point is like the red deck wins example is that I would say 75% of the games that you do win with that deck are generally going to be winnable by most players, right? And I kind of feel like a lot of Magic is not winning the games that you're supposed to win. You want to do that, right? Like you want to do that every time, but it's winning the games that you shouldn't win or that are hard to win. That I think kind of distinguishes players, and I think decks like Tempo tend to really help kind of hone you into the formats that you're playing them in. Tend to really kind of help that out and basically up your format knowledge, because you really got to be on your A game about knowing what your opponent's up to as well. To I think pilot them well. And I guess I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. Like I did do well with the deck. I just I think there's a lot of credence to I think playing them to really to up your alertness about what's going on in the format, because they're very much so kind of meta decks. They're designed to beat up on the most expected threats that are out there, while still presenting a fast clock. That's kind of why I think you see like decks like Delver do so well in formats like Legacy. Who would have thought that 1 mana 3/2 flyer would be a dominant card in a format. I don't know where Legacy's at right now, but I assume Delver's still good. Varieties of it are probably still good in Vintage. Maybe not the best, but they're okay. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool to see that. And I would say like decks like this are probably like the Delver of the format. There's also Rug decks that play very similarly to it too. And they're just kind of, I like to call them just good old-fashioned, Magic, because, at the end of the day, they're not doing anything intrinsically unfair, but the engine of them, if exploited to the maximum capability, the selection engine, the Xerox engine of them, is unfair. If you maximize your decisions while you're seeing as many cards as these decks kind of let you see, it gives you a very big advantage in games. But when you do it wrong, it's also very punishing. So I think it's a great deck to pick up if you kind of want to learn the format and you're a little more your ass is chapped a little more. You're a little more calloused. You don't mind losing, a little bit initially. I think the deck tends to over time pay a lot of dividends in your play in the format as a whole. Over some other deck choices that are out there. It's the most powerful deck in the format? Absolutely not. It's the best deck in the format? Absolutely not. But it's got a little bit of game against everything. Maybe with the exception of like just straight red deck wins. It's very tough. But yeah, very fun deck to play. It's kind of just good old-fashioned Magic. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I'm trying to do a few more videos. I've been on a kind of a hiatus from the game, like I was explaining in my last video. But I want to get more gameplay out there. And I was kind of on a tear today. Played quite a few games with this deck. And really just had a blast playing it. Like I love this deck, and I got to update it recently. And yeah, it's been kind of doing pretty well. Been kind of cracking. But you put blue and red spells together in Eternal formats. That's kind of what they do if you play them well, right? They do well for you. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. Enjoy and take care now.